So welcome everybody again to another episode of the ideaXme show, the show that profiles the humans behind the really big ideas that are shaping the world, inspiring future creators. And for all those that like really great stories, I'm Ira Pastor, your health, aging, and longevity ambassador along for this journey. Here we are, the year is 2019. Worldwide, we've surpassed $7 trillion in total healthcare expenditures, close to $1 trillion now being spent on pharmaceuticals, $350 billion on medical devices, $200 billion on new life science R&D. The list goes on and on. However, what's equally fascinating is that despite these financial dynamics, the names of many organizations that are getting involved in the space in 2019 are quite different than 15 years ago. 15 years ago, if you said healthcare clinic, you would have thought Kaiser Permanente, not Apple. If you said medical devices, you would have thought of a Baxter or a Medtronic, not Amazon. And if you said pharma, you would have thought of Merck, Glaxo, Novartis, pick one of them. You wouldn't have thought of, Google's Calico Life Science division. And yet in the last couple of years alone, many of these big tech companies have made major strategic moves into healthcare, all with the goal of using their Silicon Valley skills and, of course, piles of cash to really try to disrupt an industry with various forms of, what we'll call moonshot thinking. And many of these businesses are very different than their core businesses. So, for today's guest, I could think of no one better to come talk with us a while about these exciting initiatives in this segment of industry than Luba Greenwood. She's head of strategic business development and corporate ventures at Verily, formerly known as Google Life Sciences, which is a research organization devoted to the study of life sciences at Alphabet, formerly known as Google. And for those that are unfamiliar with Verily, their website, they're literally involved in everything health tech and futuristic, from medical devices, wearables, nanoparticle formulations, surgical robots, bioelectronic medicine. It's a fascinating list of stuff. Lewbert brings to Verily both pharma, biotech, and digital health experience, an experience in building and investing in innovation technology companies, providing strategic counsel to global corporations. Prior to Verily, Luba was the VP of Global Business Development and M&A at Roche. Luba is on the board of Mass Bio and Brooklyn ImmunoTherapeutics and serves as an advisor to Dana-Farber Cancer Institute as part of its Business Development Council. Luba is a thought leader for the New England Journal of Medicine Catalyst, founder for the Pharma Digital Health Roundtable, and a lecturer at Boston University Law School and School of Management, where since 2014 she's taught courses in life sciences, business law, innovation, entrepreneurship. Luba's career has been quite broad. She's had leadership roles in venture capital, business development, M&A, law and operations. She served as a venture partner for Cult Ventures. She led business development and strategy for Excella Health, which is a flagship venture company, and served as senior M&A counsel for Pfizer. She began her career practicing law at Wilmer Cutler, Pickering, Hale and Dorr, where she represented clients in securities and IP litigation. She's a recipient of several awards and honors for her work in the community, including the Science Club for Girls Catalyst Award for her commitment to advocating women in science and technology. She serves on nonprofit boards of Longwood Symphony Orchestra, executive coach for Max Nest Gen, co-chair of Mass Bio's Entrepreneur University, and a mentor and judge for Mass Connect, MIT 100,000K Entrepreneurship Competition, and Mass Challenge. Wow, lots of stuff. Luba, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, Ira.
It's a real pleasure. You have a fascinating background, and I think for everybody that doesn't know you, I'd love to just give you the floor for as long as you need. Love to hear about your background, how you got interested in law, how you got interested in biotech, and ultimately sort of the journey to 2019, where you basically sit at the epicenter of science, law, business development at one of the largest companies in the world.
Sure. Well, thank you. First of all, thanks for having me on the show. And absolutely, I started out actually in science. I've always loved science and medicine, and have been very passionate about learning about patient journeys and understanding really the more medicine. Actually, when I went into just undergrad, I studied science there, and I became an EMT there as well. So, which again brought me closer to understanding of science and medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have really anybody in the family that was in the space, so I didn't know much about it. I knew that and had close friends and family that suffered from different diseases, but I didn't really understand much or know anything about healthcare or medicine. Mm-hmm. And it was quite an eye-opening experience for me. Again, being an EMT and driving around an ambulance and you don't know who and helping the patients. But at some point it was a little frustrating because I thought, as I watched on television, you would bring somebody into the hospital and then they will be taken care of by a whole amazing team and they'll be cured immediately and it will be a wonderful, happy ending. Sadly, that was not really what I saw. And I was studying in one of the professors in neuroscience and biochemistry, and my thesis advisor, I said, well, I want to do innovation. Where is this area? Where is this space? Which today we have it. It's called Kendall Square, which is right here. But at the time, there was still a Kendall Square, but there was not that much biotech innovation for many reasons. Happy to go into that. But when I started looking around into what it is how I can contribute to science and driving forward innovation, my thesis advisor actually said, well, why don't you go into intellectual property law? And because that's where a lot of the scientists were going into, and those people that really wanted, it is innovation, right? It's patent. You innovate something, you get a patent in healthcare. And interestingly, it does differentiate it quite a bit from tech, if you think about it, because you have the opposite there with patent trolls and others, which is rather than encouraging innovation, it can sometimes lead to exactly the opposite. And so I went into law school, and I didn't. Again, that was not my strength. I have to say that in terms of reading and writing. Again, I was more of a scientist, but I loved it. I went on to actually work at WilmerHale for a number of years, for about over 7 years, and practice IP litigation because people said I like to talk a lot, so they said do the litigation rather than just intellectual property, and fell in love with it. I have to say, one of the things that it became very evident to me is that in anything, if you want to innovate really in healthcare, and when I say healthcare, it means anything from therapeutic development to med device to diagnostic. The regulatory environment in the IP portfolio that you have are really very much key, because when you're making those investments, it takes you a while to actually get to the patient. So that was very good training for me to really understand the importance of IP and regulatory pathway to innovation in healthcare, and then take it with me when I was on the investment side. So then I went on to Pfizer and as you mentioned, into venture and closer. And actually, when I got into venture, I realized, wow, this is actually, why didn't anybody tell me before that this is where innovation is happening? This is where you are investing and growing and incubating some of these amazing therapeutic companies, which is what I ended up doing, and concentrating more in the areas that I found very interesting, which were oncology, neurodegeneration, neuropsych diseases, back of the eye, gene therapy, and immuno-oncology, a lot of the things that my colleagues invest in as well in biotech. And then I went into Roche, actually. Roche was my first time. This was my job before coming into Google Life Sciences. And there I was on the diagnostic side and really saw quite a big difference in diagnostic and even just the business model of not just innovation, but the business model of diagnostic and med device business as opposed to the therapeutics business. And at that time, what has really brought me into tech and it was interesting because tech has reached out while I was in pharma for a while. I think the first time was about 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, I said, you guys, you don't know anything about, about therapeutics. So I was not interested, but then I realized that actually on the therapeutic side, and not just therapeutics, but diagnostics and med device side, we also knew very little about data. We knew that data was important. Of course, data is at the core, right? You always need clinical data. You need, obviously, discovery. You need data. But the actual data that you get from other sources and integrating that data and learning how to integrate and cleanse that data and draw meaningful insights from it, that is certainly where tech has a lot of the strength. So I had this amazing opportunity to come on the tech side and see how we can really converge the two. The life sciences, not to say that one is better than the other and one is going to disrupt, but more of, I think the true value is exactly where you take the life sciences and the provider and the peer experience and merge it together with tech.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you on that. It's actually a very nice transition into my first question. My first question to you, actually after this in-shot, it really was a two-part question. One was more sort of generalities and sort of to get your top sort of line response on sort of the big, why moonshots question, what sort of why, what is the major driver today, obviously the last couple of years, for these moonshots? Is it the fact that the technology has gotten so good? Is it because there's this $7 trillion basket of money that everyone wants to access? Is it because companies like Verily are so they're used to different types of risk, let's say, than say pharma is, and that makes for a benefit. Sort of the second part to that, while big tech, Alphabet, Apple, Amazon, Uber, so forth, are all making these strategic moves, you see sort of the same thing on the other side, right? I don't think there's a member of big pharma right now that isn't, it doesn't have a digital health division that they're investing in or growing in some fashion. Obviously it's early on, you don't have that crystal ball, but what do you think is going to happen though? Do you think it's going to be tech and pharma sort of fighting it out, or do you think there's going to be some type of hybrid organization that arises in the future? Because it's really it's odd because I spent my time at GSK, but it's just weird when I look at it now that all these non-drug, these are not little pills, right? I mean, these are other things that you don't normally think about pharma doing, but now they're doing it. Where do you think this is all going to fall out in sort of a
Sure. Well, that's a threefold question, as a lawyer would tell you.
Take your time with it.
Sure, not a problem. So I think where I want to start with is, if you think about it, it's always easy, and I think people tend to gravitate to an easy answer, which is to say, healthcare is a mess. There's a lot of money spent in there, and so tech came and realized it's a mess and it's going to clean it up and disrupt it. And because the healthcare players don't know what they're doing, I think that's usually an easy thing that people tend to gravitate to. But actually, the answer is actually a lot. It's a lot more complicated, and it's not even close to that. Which is, as we have been moving towards in healthcare, I mean, if you look into the amazing strides that actually pharma has done, and not just pharma, but biotech players have done, right, is we have eradicated many diseases. We have extended lives of people for many, many more years. And as we are, I guess now I'm in tech, I'm not on the life sciences, but as life science companies, I know, as life science companies, they're, for them, and that's actually a difference, right, is that they're always, a lot of the times they're thinking about, okay, what's the high unmet medical need, where they're thinking about the patient, and as they're trying to designing these solutions for patients, they do tend to get lost in some of the more because it's complicated, right? You have to first establish a patent portfolio, you have to show it in vitro, then you have to show your data in animal trials. Animal studies are very expensive, animal models are very expensive, you need to do arrays, right? And then you go into your pre-IND and then your IND and then your all of your stages of development. And sometimes as you're trying to do this and expedite it, the overall picture sometimes does get lost in this fold, which is the way we conduct clinical trials is still done in the ancient dark ages.
Right.
As you know, right, having been at GSK, we also are recognizing finally that there's some diseases. So when I started neuroscience, 20 years ago, we probably still know, about the same, or maybe just a little more about neurodegeneration, quite honestly, about cognitive decline, about what exactly causes it, what biomarkers we should be looking at, what are the endpoints when we're designing the study. And so it's to understand actually the biology of the disease, you need a lot of data, and we're recognizing, and only now and only recently, again, not because it was something that's overlooked, it's just we didn't have the capability to actually collect this data, to organize this data. So we are finally getting more data that's obviously genomics data, which, by the way, has only become cheaper quite recently, right? I mean, it used to be very expensive to run. It's easy to say, oh, why don't you sequence everyone now, sequence everyone's tumor? But it was $20,000 to do that, right? Back then. So, but as with that comes a lot of data that we're collecting, and comes a need, which is where the tech companies are coming in, and they're coming in again right now because there finally is a need to make sense of this data. There's a lot of, as we all know, there's a lot of unstructured data. There's a lot of data that's completely disconnected. We have actually, even problematically, we have some really good data, but it's not across the same phenotype, right? So even if you have great data of drug-to-drug interaction, great genomic information, but you don't have it across the same phenotype, it's still not as useful. So this is where drug companies, this is purely, I'm speaking on the therapeutic side, of course, where they, again, recognize that there is big value add that they can actually bring that biotech companies and pharma companies don't have. But at the same time, to your question, because you said, well, now pharma companies all have chief development officers, and if you look into, they're also, it's not because it was more of an oversight, they should have had it. There just wasn't enough, there wasn't enough data, really, and not enough, knowledge or even, as you said, risk. It's a big risk to go in and do some of this early drug discovery work on true personalization of understanding, a particular type of cohort versus another. So now you finally have the tools, which we didn't have before. So that's where, of course, tech company. But I just covered just therapeutics, right? There are similar answers for of course, the payers, the providers, right? I mean, again, the providers, we just went through, for example, Epic integration here in the Massachusetts in the partner space. So what does that mean, right? We just wrapped up actually having all the clinical information, the EMR, the electronic medical record information, all in one place. So the next is, well, what do you do with it? And of course, tech players have the best tools to work with that data.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you for that. You started touching on the clinical component here, and now I obviously, as I said before, you wear many hats. I'm going to ask you if you could sort of put your legal hat on now, because looking around in 2019, we are from that clinical dynamic, we're in there's a lot of unique things going on, alongside the sort of the traditional FDA model of stuff. In recent years, we've seen, agency guidances on things, biomarker-based only drug development. We've seen guidances on combination therapy protocols that can happen first. So the old model of having to test individual drugs in a combination first is out the window. And even there's this master clinical trial concept that Janet Woodcock recently published about how potentially even grouping different diseases together as a single endpoint. All of this is happening simultaneously. We have, all these right to try laws in different states and at the federal level. And then abroad, we're seeing, in Japan, we see this conditional approval of regenerative medicines. You see all sorts of free zone activity in China, and Merck did this fascinating deal with the Chinese government recently. A lot of interesting things going on. Where am I going with this question? Back in
statement, by the way.
Back in 2013, Larry Page, co-founder and CEO of Alphabet, gave this interesting talk, and he mentioned, it was for the developers in Google at the time, but it was basically about sort of this fantasy vision of, it'd be nice if somewhere on the planet there was this sort of a regulatory light area where stuff can be tried out, and easier than sort of in the traditional environment. And now, in 2019, from a drug development perspective, we see sort of some of these different models opening up. As Verily and Alphabet is such a global organization, can you sort of talk a little bit about sort of your thinking in terms of, the way you're looking at sort of clinically applying a lot of these really futuristic type technologies? Is it purely going to be sort of a US centric thing at first, or are you looking at innovative models like, Larry Page talked about a few years ago to get this type of stuff done?
Yeah. So I do have to say, so it's interesting that you're talking about the US as kind of the first one to try out some of these things. I have to say that back even at Pfizer days, many years before Roche, so Pfizer was actually one of the initial leaders in integrated health and in some very exciting, interesting approaches, which people talk about now, which is how do you do chronic disease management? How do you collect, for example, a lot of other data about our socioeconomic background, environmental factors, and other such things in order to change our behavior to reverse some diseases, as an example is diabetes, or treat chronic pain. Some of these things actually have been tried, not just tried out, but are actually used in Europe. And the reason for Europe is because Europe, I see Europe as a lot of that in terms of the approach for prevention and reimbursement for prevention is almost, realistically speaking, that special world, right? Where, but again, with all of that, of course, you need clinical validation and approvals are similar to, of course, FDA approvals.
Sure.
I think some of the questions you say, it was 2013. Tech companies have recognized and through difficult, some tech companies have recognized kind of through difficult lessons that the regulatory component is extraordinarily important for healthcare. And there is no special world where you could test things out, right? There is the reality, and the reality actually protects the patient. And that's another thing. I think it's a bit of a misconception sometimes that tech just goes in and does these. No, I mean, if you look at Apple, right? I mean, Apple is doing an actual clinical trial, right? And they're enrolling patients faster than the Framingham study ever did, right? And look at the amazing information and knowledge and insights we're actually getting from that. So I think you have seen, but you're right. It's there's a big difference between 2013, which is why I didn't necessarily want to go into tech in 2013 and 2019 and even 2018 and 17 in terms of recognizing the importance of the regulatory framework, and it's there for a reason to protect. And and a patient, and that's another thing is that I do want to separate out, and this is a lot of what we're actually trying to do here in Massachusetts as on a board of Mass Bio is recognizing that there are two approaches today at this intersection of tech and life and healthcare. There is the consumer-facing approach, which is where you view your end user, basically your end user, your customer as a customer and as a consumer. Versus there's another world which is more what's happening in Massachusetts, and a lot of the investment that you see that's both tech and biotech is investing in here in Cambridge is more of understanding and recognizing that the end user could be a provider, it could be a payer, but ultimately it is actually for a patient rather than for.
Right.
But that line has actually been only drawn I would say mostly in the last year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been a little of a gray zone.
With your venture capital experience now, we, as you're aware, and biotech has this problem. Well, part of biotech has this problem known as the Valley of Death. This extremely challenging period for any biotech company, somewhere between late stage preclinical research and early proof of principle phase 2, where traditionally there's been a dearth of private equity and big pharma involvement. As big pharma's gotten bigger, they technically have been investing later and later, gotten less, more risk averse in some ways. Do you see a role for tech companies to help, let's say, bridge that valley of death because of some of their more risk, less risk averse tendencies in ways, or do you think it's the valley of death is the valley of death and it's
Yeah, great question. I am excited that tech investors, right? Investors from Silicon Valley are coming in, investing in biotech, because in biotech, we have become quite comfortable with what we know is a wonderful, great formula for success. And we know what works, we know what doesn't. We recognize where there is a high unmet medical need and where we understand the biology. There's still wonderful opportunities out there for areas that are out of our comfort zone, and not necessarily because it's too risky, it's just out of the comfort zone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say neurodegeneration is actually one such example, right? I mean, you see a lot more biotech investors are now finally talking about it, because you have tech investors that are coming in and saying, okay, well, this is an obvious need, right? You have Alzheimer's is a huge unmet medical need. There's a lot of great research, and again, the research and data is at very initial stages. There's still not enough data to even de-risk many of these programs, even at all. But that is an area where many tech investors understand that you should invest in it, right? We have seen some really good early data in some companies, so they're more willing to. I wouldn't even say so much, because both biotech and tech investors actually take the same risk, right? Because they usually invest in something that's maybe was just de-risked enough through animal models, or maybe just getting there, right? It's all
right.
IND. So it's actually, technically, it's the same risk profile. It's just the comfort level is not there for some of the programs and you saw this in places like microbiome.
Right.
is again an area that actually tech investors were starting initially to invest, and then biotech investors followed.
Right. That's a great example, actually.
Yeah.
The area of artificial intelligence is something that it's coming up quite frequently in the healthcare space nowadays. Now I'm aware that sort of Alphabet owns a variety of AI-related assets. I was talking to a friend of mine in Big Pharma a couple of weeks ago, and in their sort of competitive intelligence database, he highlighted there is over 150 companies currently that are providing some type of artificial intelligence, deep learning, whatever you want to call it, services to pharma now. I would like to get just your sort of top line on AI as a tool. Is it real? Is it something that people are putting on things more than they need to? What's your opinion on sort of where that's all going? Specifically, obviously, you invest in AI at Alphabet for other things, but specifically in healthcare. You got like sort of what's real, what's not, and.
I'm surprised you said 150. I wonder who did their market intelligence. I think it's a lot more than that. I thought I just looked at 150 just in the last 3 months. Absolutely. I mean, AI reminds me a bit of, in biotech, we have this NASH. I don't know if you're familiar.
Sure.
NASH, so it's kind of, very, of course, just yes, you are. It's one of those indications that you start with one or two, your first indication, but then you would see on the deck that, oh, you're definitely going to go into NASH, because ultimately that's something that many people will get, right? So that's number one, huge unmet medical need, and number two, a huge market, right? So it's, and whether or not you actually even have you're even going after the same mechanism of action or the same pathway that even ultimately is involved in NASH, that is not relevant to some of these companies that put NASH on as an indication, just to increase valuation. So AI is a bit, to me, it's a bit similar to that. I'm glad that you said not just AI, but machine learning. We've seen, even in a lot of this reviews and looking at companies, there are actually still very few true applications of AI in healthcare. There are, of course, some amazing examples. You've seen it at, so for example, and I would say mostly in imaging, which makes sense, because in imaging, it is one of the few areas where you can have literally hundreds of thousands of images. So that's digital pathology, for example, is an area that certainly can and should be basically disrupted through the use of machine learning algorithms, and I think it will, from what we are seeing. You have many other space, of course, in imaging. We see many companies popping up. So I think it is definitely something that we are seeing in the horizon. There's an enormous amount of hype. I can tell you, and this is not my quote, it was actually from Abby Selniker from Third Rock, who said, I think over $1 or $2 billion has been literally by VCs thrown out and wasted on bad data. And that bad data, because you're trying to gather and capture that data that you think is going to be actually useful to truly apply any sort of insights into it, any sort of analytics, and many have not even gotten there. But we know with imaging we certainly can. So it certainly depends on an area. But we're not the only. I would say most tech investors are highly skeptical, and I'm glad that most pharma now has chief digital officers to make sure that they pick the right type of ML help and apply it to the right type of data, which most of them don't actually have. So.
Right. Thank you for that. Thank you. Coming back now to Lewbert Greenwood. It was wonderful information and sharing your thoughts with us on each of these areas. But coming back to you, could you tell us about any mentors, influencers, other important people throughout your career that you might want to give a shout out to, that if you didn't run into this person, that you would have decided to stay in EMT or not go into law and do something totally different? Are there some people that you want to shout out to on that particular front?
And thank you so much for asking that, because that to me is very important. I was very lucky. I'm an immigrant to this country. I'm not from here, and I didn't speak English when I came, which is another kind of a funny thing that I even went into law. But I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't really be here at all if it wasn't for mentors, and that is actually one of the things that is very important and dear to me. So I do a lot of mentorship, and I would say it started for me really with a federal judge that I work for, Richard Stearns, Judge Stearns, who was incredible, and he took, you can imagine, somebody that is, again, an immigrant, doesn't know anybody, doesn't know, or let alone law, or anybody in law, and he inspired me, and he made me confident. He sort of showed me that I can be confident, I can write, so he verified that. So that was. But he was incredible, and he made me realize that actually being not from this country and being an immigrant is an asset. I think when you come here, you have a pretty big sort of imposter syndrome, at least I did. So do I really belong here? And he made it clear that apparently I did, which was very nice. And he was an incredible person. And then the second, I'd say two more. Another is when I went into big law firm, and it was also Bill Lee, who was and still is, I think, one of the best litigators, lawyers, and I think in the world. I think the world of him, again, really believed in me and has given me a chance, which I think is always important. I think people forget. They think that they land all these jobs and opportunities because they've earned them. I think sometimes somebody takes a chance on you, which he did. And it was incredible, and really teaching me work ethic. That was another thing that was I think is very important for a very young lawyer to actually learn not just law, but just the importance of work and work ethic. And then the third is, and that she has passed Carolyn Green, who was just a brilliant, most incredible. She was executive at Pfizer. And she got me into actually a lot of mentorship of girls and women in STEM, and I tried to continue that. And yeah, she was an incredible person.
Wonderful. Seems like you definitely, we're very, fortunate to have such a diverse group sort of mold you in that context. That's, it's a wonderful story. So now I have to, with the final wrap up, I have to give you what we refer to as our science fiction question now. I'm going to propose to you that I have a fully functional time machine sitting in the room over here with me. And I'm going to allow you, Luba Greenwood, to use it. You can take it and go anywhere you want. You can go the past, the future. You can meet scientists, artists, philosophers, celebrities, wherever you want to go. You can only meet one person. And talk to them for a short period. Who do you want to meet, and what would you want to talk to them about? And take your time with that one if you need time.
That's a very good question. I want to meet so many people.
Only one.
Only one.
Takes too much energy.
I know. It must be it's a very expensive machine there. You have.
It has no venture capital money in it.
I'll invest. Oh God. Okay, let me see. One person. Well, I would definitely go into the past, because I do think that there's a lot that we can learn from history. There's so many people that would be interesting. So first of all, there are many people. I did just see this interesting documentary on Netflix, and it was about Leonardo da Vinci. And a lot of what the documentary was actually talking about is about him, and he had such a and they could only he seemed like sort of the Elon Musk of his time.
Yep.
But what I thought was interesting is that there were some signs that a lot of what has driven him and how he thought about the world actually came from his mother. And but there's very little that is known. So I would actually be very curious and interested to meet Leonardo da Vinci's mom. Yes. And I myself have 2 daughters, so maybe she can give me some pointers.
Okay. That's an excellent answer. It's funny, just a side note, I have a book over here called Learning from Leonardo, and Leonardo da Vinci's gotten a lot of play lately about how much of a genius he was. So it's I'd love to meet his mother too. Yeah, well, because
father. He said that a lot of it, because he was a very curious person, right? And he also he had actually that confidence to look and discover many different things and go into many different areas. And but he actually in some letters in some areas he has credited kind of that to his mom. So I'm very I'd just be very curious. I would love to ask her questions.
Wonderful. Totally perfect answer. I enjoyed that. I like that. Really, I mean, this was such a pleasure having you today, and honor for you to take the time and spend it with us in the audience. Really, thank you for everything you do, and being at the epicenter of health, law, investments, innovation. It's an extremely important role, because I think too many folks hang out in silos as they're called and don't really think of the convergence of all these important areas, but it's wonderful that you have created this place for yourself and are, doing what you're doing now. And it's really amazing. And just thank you for everything, taking the time out of your schedule. Once again, for everybody listening, Lewbert Greenwood, Head of Strategic Business Development and Corporate Ventures at Verily, former Google Life Sciences, part of the Alphabet Corporation. And we will be linking to a variety of pages. And if there's any conferences or investment conferences, things of this nature you'll be speaking at, shoot me those links and we'll link to all this when we put the show together. But it's been a real pleasure having you today, Luba.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.